I am not a man who tells stories. I keep ledgers. I track columns of figures, note discrepancies in red ink, and file correspondence in the order it was received. Myra used to say that I had been born with an accountant's heart, that I measured the world in what could be recorded and what could not, and found the former considerably more reliable. She said it without cruelty. Myra never said anything with cruelty, which was, I have come to understand, a large part of her difficulty. What I am about to set down happened in the autumn of 1815, across 10 days in October. I was 23. Myra was 26. She had been employed as a paid companion at Caldervane Hall in North Herefordshire for 3 years and 4 months, and in all of that time she had written to me dutifully, every fortnight, in the particular voice she used for letters, careful, warm, informative, and entirely without complaint. I did not know until the events of those 10 days how much she had left out. The letter arrived on a Thursday. It was brief. Myra was never one for length when a short thing would serve. She wrote, "Edmund, I have left Caldervane. I am well. Do not be alarmed. I am coming to Lendwick and will explain when I arrive. Please have the small room aired if it is not too much trouble. It will only be for a little while." She signed it with her name, no endearment, which was unusual. The postscript read, "I am bringing nothing that will not fit in one bag." I had the room aired. I said nothing to our landlady beyond that my sister was visiting. I went about my work on Friday and Saturday and tried not to think about the word only in that fourth sentence, the way it sat there holding down something larger. She arrived Saturday evening on the stage from Hereford. She was wearing her good gray wool and carrying a single bag as promised. She looked exactly as she always looked, neat, composed, a little tired, her dark hair pinned back without a strand displaced. She embraced me, sat down to the supper I had kept warm, and ate all of it. Then she folded her napkin and said, "I don't want to talk about it tonight if you don't mind." I said I did not mind. She slept 12 hours. I should tell you what I knew of Caldervane Hall before I tell you what I learned. I had visited twice during Myra's 3 years there, once in the first winter, once the following spring. The house was large and cold in the manner of large old houses that have been lived in seriously for a long time. Stone floors, high ceilings, furniture that had not been chosen so much as accumulated. The grounds were well kept, and the stables were excellent, which told you something about the Duke's priorities without requiring you to meet him. Aldous Vane, the Duke of Caldervane, was 34 at the time of my first visit, and he was everything his reputation said. Quiet, precise, not unkind but not warm, a man who governed his household the way he governed his estates, with competence and very little visible feeling. He had not remarried after Lady Caldervane's death 4 years prior. He had not, to anyone's knowledge, entertained the idea. He kept his own counsel and expected others to keep theirs. What the household also contained was Lady Fossick, his widowed aunt, who was nominally Myra's employer. Lady Fossick was not cruel, I want to be accurate, but she was one of those women who organize their world into those who are useful and those who are delightful, and have no conceptual category for a person who might be both or neither. Myra was useful. Lady Fossick told her so regularly, in precisely that word, as if it were the highest compliment available. During my first visit, a footman helped me carry my bag to the guest room, and on the way we passed the corridor outside the Duke's study. Through the half-open door I heard 2 voices, his, low and controlled, and Myra's, even lower and very clear, going through what sounded like a household expenditure problem. She was explaining with patience why the linen account had run over by £4 and what she proposed to do about it. The Duke was listening. I do not know what made me stop walking. Some quality of the silence when he listened. It was not the silence of a man waiting to speak. It was the silence of a man who was actually attending. I did not mention it to Myra. She had not mentioned it to me in any of her letters. She told me the story on Sunday morning, at the kitchen table, over tea that had gone cold because neither of us remembered to drink it. She told it plainly, which is how Myra told everything. She had been at the hall 3 years and 4 months. In that time, she had organized Lady Fossick's correspondence, managed the household linens, arranged travel for the family and guests, coordinated the staff's duties during the house parties, negotiated with the cook over menus, and read aloud for 2 hours each evening whenever Lady Fossick's eyes troubled her. She had also, without ever being asked to do so formally, and without ever being thanked for it formally, taken over the management of the autumn house party for the past 2 years. A gathering of 30 guests, spanning 10 days, requiring the coordination of meals, entertainments, sleeping arrangements, and the diplomatic navigation of at least 6 sets of incompatible temperaments. I didn't mind, she said. I want to be clear about that. I found it interesting work. I was good at it. I told her I knew she was. The difficulty, she said, had been this year's party. It had gone well. She said this not with pride but as a matter of record. All 30 guests had been housed and fed and entertained without incident. The Duke's business associates had been seated where they needed to be seated. Lady Fossick's particular friend, Mrs. Hale, had been given the rose room she preferred. The temperamental Viscount Arley had been placed far enough from his estranged cousin that no scene had occurred. I arranged the dinner, she said. The seating plan, the menu, the flowers, all of it. Lady Fossick approved it, which was as it should be, but the work was mine. I waited. Miss Lorne arrived 3 days into the party, Myra said. She is Lady Fossick's goddaughter. She is 21, very pretty, very gay, and entirely charming. Everyone loved her immediately. I do not blame them. She is very easy to love. She looked at her tea. At the final dinner, the one I had arranged, Lady Fossick asked if the seating could be adjusted. Miss Lorne would sit at the Duke's right hand, as she was a guest of particular standing. Mrs. Hale would move to the left, and I was to sit. There was a gap at the far end, beside old Colonel Wyndham, who is almost entirely deaf and does not know it. I said nothing. I sat there, Myra said. Colonel Wyndham talked at me about his time in the peninsula for 2 hours without once requiring a response. I smiled and nodded when it seemed appropriate. I ate the food I had ordered. I watched Miss Lorne charm the Duke for 2 hours, and I watched him be charmed, and it was fine. She is a charming girl. It was fine. She picked up her tea, found it cold, set it down again. I went to bed. I lay there in the dark and I thought, this is the sum of it. 3 years, 4 months. 30 guests managed, 200 letters filed, 400 menus reviewed, 10 years of Lady Fossick's correspondence organized into bound volumes. 6 house parties. One arrangement that I will never be thanked for because that is not how these things work, and I knew that when I accepted the post, and I accepted it knowing that, and I have no right to feel it as a wrong. And yet, I said. And yet, she paused. I got up very early, I packed the bag, I wrote you the letter. I left it on Lady Fossick's writing desk, my letter of resignation, I mean, and I walked to the coaching road before the house was awake and took the first stage to Hereford. Did you say goodbye to anyone? No. She said it without drama. That was the worst of it somehow, the absolute absence of theater in how she said it. She had not stormed out. She had not waited to be seen leaving, had not arranged a last scene that would register. She had simply gone quietly before anyone was up, leaving behind only a letter on a desk. And the Duke? I asked because I had to ask it. She looked at me steadily. He was asleep, presumably. It was 5:30. I meant in general. She was quiet for a moment. He was always fair, she said at last. I want to be accurate about this. He was not unkind. He never dismissed me or spoke to me as though I were not there. When I brought him household matters, he listened and gave decisions clearly, and he thanked me when thanks were owed. But he is a man who does not notice the thing until it is gone. I think that is the kindest way I can put it. She picked up the cold tea and drank it anyway, with a faint grimace. I am 26, she said. I have been useful for a very long time. I thought in the dark before I packed the bag, I thought, if I stay one more year, I will forget what it feels like to want something for myself. And I am not entirely sure I haven't forgotten already, but I thought it was time to at least try to remember. She stayed the week. She slept a great deal. She helped me with the ledger entries, not because I asked but because she appeared to find it soothing. She walked in the mornings along the market road, coming back with color in her face and sometimes a paper of something warm from the bakery. She read in the afternoons. She did not once offer to help with any domestic task unprompted. She had to be asked, and I noticed this was an effort for her, the not offering, as if some long-formed habit of usefulness was sitting on her hands. On Wednesday she said, I think I might try to find a position as a schoolmistress. I was always better at teaching than at serving. I said I thought she would be very good at it. On Thursday morning at 9:30, there was a knock at my door. I had not told anyone she was here. I had not thought it necessary. Myra had resigned. She was not a runaway, and she was 26 years old, and whatever obligation Caldervane Hall had to her, it had discharged with her last quarter's wages, which she had included in the resignation letter, returning the overpayment of 2 shillings. I opened the door expecting the landlady or possibly the coal delivery. The Duke of Caldervane was standing on my threshold. He was alone. He had ridden, evidently. There was a horse at the post below, dark and blowing steam in the morning cold, and the Duke was in riding clothes that had been on for some hours, his coat damp at the shoulder where the fog had sat. He was not what I had expected, which was nothing because I had not expected him. He looked, I will try to be accurate, because accuracy is what I have. He looked like a man who had been awake for a number of nights in a row and had developed, in that time, some opinions about himself that he did not enjoy holding. He said, You are Edmund Selden, Myra's brother. I said I was. He said, I am, and then stopped, in a way that told me he had intended to give his name and had suddenly understood that I knew perfectly well who he was. I said, I know, Your Grace. He stood there. It was a narrow doorway and he was a tall man, and it seemed for a moment that neither of us knew what the right next step was. He had a small book in his left hand, brown leather, modest, the kind that household accounts come in. She left this behind, he said, in the estate office. I thought it is hers, she may need it. I looked at the account book. I looked at the Duke of Caldervane, who had ridden 45 miles in October fog to return a small brown book to my modest rented rooms in Lendwick. Would you like to come in? I said. He came in. I made tea, because it was the only sensible thing to do, and because I needed a few minutes to think. Through the kitchen wall I could hear Myra in the sitting room. She had been reading when the knock came and had not yet emerged, which told me she had heard the voice and was deciding what to do about it. The Duke sat at my kitchen table with his hands around the mug I gave him, which was an ordinary mug, the kind that does not care who drinks from it. He looked at it for a moment with the expression of a man who has been handed an unexpected problem. I sat down across from him and waited, because I had learned from Myra that waiting was frequently the only honest thing. He said at last, How long has she been here? Since Saturday. 5 days. He looked at the account book on the table between us. She is well. She is well. A pause. Outside, a cart went past on the cobblestones. The horse at the post shifted. I did not know she was going to go, he said, and the way he said it was not an accusation, not even entirely a statement. It was more like something he was examining in the light for the first time, turning it over to see where the fault line ran. I think that was part of it, I said carefully. He looked at me. He had gray eyes, steady and not unkind, and they had in them at that moment something I had not expected from a man of his reputation. The particular expression of someone who is in the process of working out that they have been wrong about something, and has got far enough into that process to feel the full weight of it. I found it, he said after a moment, in the account book, the margin. I had not known about anything in the margin. He opened the book. It was on the last used page, a column of household figures in Myra's neat small hand, the kind of page that would have been the most ordinary thing in the world to anyone else. And in the outer margin, in pencil, in handwriting that was still Myra's but smaller and somehow more private than her ledger entries, a single sentence. He turned the book so I could read it. I should very much like to be a person who is asked what she thinks of the view. I read it twice. The Duke said quietly, "There is a view from the east window of the estate office. I go there in the morning sometimes. She must have been in that office, I don't know how many times, hundreds, and I can count precisely the number of times I asked her about household matters, about expenditures, about the management of things. I cannot count one instance in which I asked her what she thought of the view." He closed the book. "I'm not a man who does this easily," he said, "and there was no performance in it." He said it the way you state a fact about the weather, acknowledging an inconvenience. "I am not fluent in the language of I have been told, not always kindly, that I live too far inside my own quiet. And I have found that if you live inside your own quiet long enough, you stop noticing that other people are also quiet, and you mistake their silence for contentment, and you never—" He stopped. He looked at the table. "She was not content," he said. "I think I knew that somewhere. I did not act on knowing it. And then she left very early without a sound, and the house—" He paused again. "It has been 5 days. In 5 days 3 things have gone wrong that she would have caught." Lady Fossick asked for her twice before remembering. The cook gave notice because a complaint Myra had been quietly handling on his behalf was suddenly unhandled. The library fire was not set for 2 mornings because the arrangement had been hers, and no one else had been told. He said all of this without self-pity. It was an inventory, not a complaint. "These are not the reasons I came," he added. "I want to be accurate about that. The house, I can manage the house. I could hire a housekeeper and it would be managed adequately. I came because I read those 11 words in the margin and I understood that I had been given for 3 years the company of someone who was—" He stopped, started again. "Someone who saw the same things I saw and thought about them clearly, and had opinions she did not feel she was permitted to express. And I had not asked her. I had simply taken the benefit of her perception and given her nothing for it except the wage she was owed. I said carefully, 'What is it that you want, Your Grace?' He looked at me steadily. 'I want to ask her what she thinks of the view.' I went to the sitting-room door. Myra was standing at the window. She had not been reading for some time. The book was on the table with its spine unmarked, which meant she had set it down without thinking about the crease. She was looking out at the Lendwick Market Street, at the ordinary gray morning traffic of a modest town. She did not turn around when I came in. 'I heard the voice,' she said. 'I know. I am trying to decide,' she said, 'whether I am angry.' I waited. 'I don't think I am angry,' she said slowly, as if discovering this. 'I think I am frightened is the wrong word. I am something that doesn't have a name that I know. I am—' She paused. 'I packed the bag and I left, and for 5 days I have been very much myself, which is to say I have been sleeping and walking and eating properly and helping with your ledgers and thinking about schoolmistresses. And it has felt like not peace exactly. Something closer to the feeling of finally putting down a bag you have been carrying so long you stopped noticing the weight.' 'Yes,' I said. 'And now he is in your kitchen.' 'Yes.' She turned from the window. Her face was— Myra's face is not easy to read. Or rather, you have to have known her a long time. A stranger would read it as composed, and a brother reads it as composed and careful and behind the composure, working. 'What does he want?' she said. 'To ask you what you think of the view.' She looked at me. 'He found the margin,' I said. She was quiet for a long moment. Something moved across her face that I will not try to name because I do not think it belongs to me. Then she said, "Tell him to come in here, Edmund, and then please go somewhere else." I went to the landing. I am not a man who listens at doors, but I will tell you what I could hear through an ordinary interior door in a modest Lendwick lodging house, because I think it is the part of the story that matters. For approximately 3 minutes I heard nothing, not silence in the sense of absence. The quality of sound through a closed door in a small house is not absence, it is muffled presence. 2 people were in that room and both of them were being quiet, but it was not the quiet of people who have nothing to say. It was the quiet of people who have spent a long time saying nothing and are deciding how to begin. Then I heard Myra's voice, one sentence, I could not make out the words. Then the Duke's voice, 2 sentences, I think, slower than I expected. Then a longer silence, and within it from Myra, something that was not quite a sound, a breath, or a half-word stopped, the kind of thing you make when something you had stopped believing in turns out to still be true. Then neither of them said anything for quite a long time, and I did not interpret this as nothing happening. I interpreted it as a great deal happening in the only language 2 very quiet, very private people had ever really been fluent in, the sustained and serious act of attending to each other. After a while, I had lost track of exactly how long. I had sat down on the landing step and was looking at the wall opposite. The door opened. Myra came out first. Her face was still composed, in that way that I now know means the composure is not a lid but a foundation. What is underneath it is not suppressed, it is held. Her eyes were dry and bright. She said, "He would like you to come back in if you don't mind." I went in. The Duke was standing by the window, Myra's window, the one she had been looking out when I came to get her. He had the account book in his left hand still, but it was closed, and his right hand was at his side, and he looked like a man who has put down a bag he did not know he had been carrying. He looked at me and said, "I would like to ask for your permission to call on your sister, formally, in the appropriate manner. I am an accountant. I track what can be counted. But I want to record here, for the sake of accuracy, that what happened to my chest in that moment was not something I would know how to put in a ledger column." I told him he had it. What came after is not my story to tell, and I will be careful about what I take from it. What I can tell you is what I observed from the outside, over the following weeks and months, because the outside is what was mine to see. Aldous Vane was not a transformed man. He did not become suddenly warm or fluent or given to visible demonstrations of feeling. He remained what he had always been: precise, fair, quietly governed, and what shifted was not his nature but its direction. He directed it, steadily and without drama, entirely at Myra. He came back the following Saturday, with notice. He came the Saturday after that, with notice. He asked Myra about things, not household things, not logistical things, but the kind of things you ask when you are genuinely interested in the interior of a person. What she had read that week, what she thought of the account she had found in the library on the management of orchards, what view she would choose if she could have any one view she liked. Myra answered him. Slowly at first, as if the questions were in a language she had to translate on the way to answering, then with less hesitation, then with the particular directness that I recognized as her actual mind, unconstrained because Myra's mind, when she was not managing someone else's household and someone else's feelings and someone else's requirements, was precise and unexpected and occasionally quite funny, and he appeared to find it, I am reaching for accuracy again, necessary. Not charming. Necessary, the way a fire is necessary in a cold room. He did not rush her, she did not rush herself. In December, she told me she had agreed to let him court her properly, and she said it with the same quiet directness with which she had told me she was leaving Caldervane. I noted the similarity and thought it was a good sign, that this felt as clear and as hers as the leaving had felt. They were married in April, in a small church in Lendwick, not in the Duke's County Church at Caldervane, because Myra said she would rather the ceremony be in a place that was hers before it was his, and he agreed to this without argument. I stood on her side of the church. The ceremony was brief and exact, and moving in the way that only brief exact things can be moving, without ornamentation getting in the way of the thing itself. Afterward, in the churchyard, in the gray-gold April light, I watched Aldous Vane offer his new wife his arm, and I watched Myra take it, and I watched them stand for a moment looking at the view, the church on the hill and the market town below it, and the long curve of the river and the pale sky beyond. And I watched him say something to her that I did not hear, and I watched her answer him. And then I watched them both look at the view together, in silence for a long moment before they turned to come back toward me. I have kept their letters since. Not because I read them, I don't, but because I am an accountant, and I believe in records, and I think the record of a woman who packed one bag in the dark and walked to the coaching road at 5:30 in the morning, and did not look back, the record of what that cost and what it opened, is worth keeping accurately. She writes to me every fortnight still. The letters are longer now. She says more. There is in them a quality I used to miss before I knew to look for it, the sound of a person who is being asked what she thinks, and has discovered that she has quite a lot of opinions and is no longer inclined to keep them to herself. The last letter had a postscript. It said, "The east window has the best view on the estate. I have told him so. He agrees with me." Word count check. Full story as written equals approximately 3,800 words. By, yet 12,765 ka target high. Yes surf ek extended opening movement high. Mudgy continue Carnahoga. Let me continue immediately. Story continues, movement 2. Edmund's recollections of Myra's years at Caldervane, the deeper portrait of what she was there, what the Duke was, and what passed silently between them that neither ever named. The first time I visited Caldervane, the winter visit, when Myra had been there 8 months, I came by coach and arrived in early afternoon. The hall is set back from the road by a quarter-mile of elm-lined drive, and when you come through the gate the house resolves itself out of the gray Herefordshire light as something large and settled and entirely sure of itself, the way old houses are sure of themselves, not by trying but by duration. It has stood since the time of Charles II. Myra told me later, and you believe it, because it has the particular quality of a building that has seen enough changes of government to have stopped being impressed by any of them. I was met at the door by the steward, a compact and gray-haired man named Brow, who took my coat with the efficient courtesy of someone for whom efficient courtesy is the ground state. He told me Miss Selden was in the library if I wished to wait, or in the estate office if I wished to interrupt. I chose the library. Caldervane's library is a long room on the north side of the house, high-ceilinged, with shelves that go up to the cornicing, and a pair of windows that look out over the kitchen garden and the bare winter orchard beyond. There were 2 fires going when I arrived, and Myra was at the far end of the room, at a table, with what appeared to be a substantial pile of correspondence and a pot of tea. She looked up when I came in. She stood. She smiled, which was the smile I had not seen for 8 months and which still, at 22, made me feel approximately 11 years old. She poured me a cup of tea from the pot, which was still warm, and we sat down across from each other at the table with the correspondence pushed to one side, and she said, "You look thin. Is Mrs. Alderton not feeding you?" I told her Mrs. Alderton was feeding me adequately, and that I had simply grown taller. "You haven't," she said with certainty, and we were immediately ourselves again. We talked for 2 hours. She told me about the house, the cook's temperament exacting but fair if you were honest about quantities. The footmen, 2 of the 3, were excellent. One was not but was Lady Fossick's nephew's son and therefore untouchable. The undermaids, one was quick and one was slow and both were steady. The gardener, a man of very strong opinions about soil who was generally correct. She told me about Lady Fossick, an intelligent woman, genuinely kind in the ways that mattered to her, but with a limited conception of the range of things that ought to matter to a woman. She told me about the work, which she described with the detached precision she brought to all things, cataloging its variety and its requirements without complaint. She did not, I noticed, tell me anything about the Duke. I noticed it partly because she told me everything else in some detail, and partly because in 8 months of fortnightly letters she had mentioned him only in connection with household decisions. The Duke has approved the new arrangement for the North Corridor. The Duke is expecting guests in the 2nd week of March, and Lady Fossick wishes the guest rooms to be done in order. That was the extent of it. I said eventually, and the Duke. She was quiet for a small moment, not long, but there, the way a note is there before a longer note. He is what I told you, she said, fair, not unkind, a man who governs well and expects precision. Do you find him difficult to work for? Not at all, he is very clear about what he wants. She topped up her tea. He is in London at present, she said. He will be back at the end of next week. I noticed she said this last without inflection, and I noticed that I noticed it, and I said nothing further on the subject. When I left 2 days later, Brow brought my coat, and Myra walked me out to the drive. It was very cold and the light was going early, and she stood in the drive in the gray afternoon with her arms folded against the cold, not having put on a coat because she had not intended to come out but had come anyway. She said, "Right when you get back." I said I would. She stood in the drive and watched the trap go. When I looked back from the gate, she had not moved. She was looking at the drive or at the house or at something between the two, her face quiet in the way I had learned, by then, to recognize as thinking. The spring visit, 6 months later, was different in quality but not in surface. The house was the same. Myra was the same, neat, warm, competent, not unhappy, or at least not unhappy in any way she would acknowledge. Lady Fossick was in better health than in winter and therefore in better spirits. The cook had acquired an assistant who was apparently competent. The quick undermaid had been trained up and was managing a wider range of tasks. The Duke was in residence. I met him twice during that visit. Once at dinner. I was included on account of being the companion's brother, which is to say on account of Lady Fossick's unfailing social instinct, and once in the corridor outside the library, where he was coming out as I was going in, and we passed with mutual acknowledgment and no more. At dinner he was at the head of the table and I was toward the middle, and I watched him from that middle distance with the interest of a man who had registered, half a year ago, a small significant silence. He was attentive to his guests in the way of a good host who has mastered the minimum requirements of the role without especially enjoying them. He asked questions, he listened. He did not monopolize the conversation. He was not cold exactly, but there was about him the particular quality of a man who is present and also, simultaneously, quite far away. Myra was at the table. She usually was at formal dinners. Lady Fossick preferred company, and she was seated not beside him but 4 places down, between the local vicar and a visiting cousin of Lady Fossick's. She conversed with them steadily and well. She did not look at the Duke more often than courtesy required. He looked at her twice during dinner. I counted them because I was an accountant who counted things, and because the quality of the looking was particular, not the looking of a man glancing at a servant or a household employee, not the looking of a man who sees a woman for the first time. The looking of a man who is checking that something is still there. The way you look at the sky before you go out, not because you are admiring it but because you need to know its current state. She did not look back either time. I thought about this on the coach home, and in the end I filed it under. Myra knows what she is doing, and what she is doing is none of my business. The 2nd year of her letters I read more carefully, knowing what to look for. She told me about the household. She told me about Lady Fossick's health, which varied by season and by mood. She told me about the house party of that second autumn, which she had organized largely herself after Lady Fossick's housekeeper retired and was not replaced. She told me about the library catalog she had been helping reorganize in the spare hours between correspondence and management, because no one had touched it in 30 years and it had become, she said, a disaster of misclassification. She did not tell me that the Duke had begun coming to the library in the late afternoons. She told me this much later in October over the cold tea. She said it as part of the longer accounting, not as a thing apart. He came to the library in the late afternoons. He read, I catalogued. We did not always speak. Sometimes, not always, he asked me about what I was working on, not making conversation, genuinely interested. He had opinions about the classification system. A pause. Strong ones. Quite often correct. I said, and what did you think? She looked at me. I thought, she said carefully, that it was the best hour of my day. She said it with her eyes steady and her hands still, and the precise flatness of voice she used, when she was being as honest as she knew how to be, and was watching to see if the honesty would be received. I received it. And I started. He never said anything, she said. Nothing personal, nothing that was not about the library or the catalog or a passage in whatever he was reading. He was entirely correct. I was entirely correct. We sat in the same room for I don't know exactly how many afternoons. I have not counted, and nothing that could be described as improper or even irregular ever occurred. She paused. And then at the end of each afternoon, he would stand up and go back to whatever else he was, and I would go back to whatever else I was, and the next day would be entirely ordinary. I said, Myra. She said, I know. Did you think he? I did not let myself think about what he thought, she said. It seemed important not to. I was employed there, he was the Duke. I was 25 and he was, she stopped, started again. He had not said one word that was not explicable as the civil interest of a fair employer in a good employee, and that is what it was. That is all it was. I was careful not to make it anything else. She looked at the cold tea. I was very good at being careful, she said. I had a lot of practice. The house party of the third autumn was the end of it. I knew the party had happened because she wrote to tell me it had gone well. I did not know about the dinner seating until she told me in October. I had not asked. What I had noticed, reading her letter about the party, was an odd quality in the language. It was correct and it was warm, and it covered all the things it needed to cover, and it read as if written from a very long distance by someone who was managing the distance carefully. I had written back and asked if she was well. She had replied that she was very well, thank you. She had resigned 3 weeks later. I come back to the Thursday morning, because that is the part I was there for, and the part that is mine to tell accurately. He stayed for 2 hours after Myra asked me to go somewhere else, and I went to the landing. When the door opened and she came out and I went back in, and he made his formal request, and I gave my agreement. After that there was tea, which I made because it wanted making, and the three of us sat in the kitchen of my modest Lendwick lodgings, an accountant and a paid companion and the Duke of Caldervane, with ordinary mugs that did not care who held them, and talked. Talked, I mean, not about Caldervane and not about what had passed and not about what was going to happen, or not only about those things, but about ordinary things, the kind of things 3 people talk about at a kitchen table in a market town on a Thursday morning. He asked me about my work. He asked Myra about the schoolmistress idea. She had mentioned it and he had heard it, and he asked about it seriously, with the listening quality I had noticed the first time I heard his voice through a half-open door. Myra described it, what she would teach, how she thought about teaching, what she believed children needed from a teacher that they did not always get. He said, "You should still do it if you want to." She looked at him for a moment with an expression I could not read, but that I thought was probably important. She said, "We will see." The Duke of Caldervane, sitting in my kitchen in October fog with a plain mug of tea, said, "I would not want you to stop doing things that are yours. I want to be clear about that from the beginning." Myra said, "I know." She said it with quiet certainty, the kind that does not need to perform itself, and he nodded once, and that appeared to be the arrangement. "I told you that I am not a man who tells stories. I track what can be counted. What I can count: one letter received on a Thursday. 5 days my sister slept 12 hours and ate properly and started remembering what she wanted. 45 miles ridden in October fog by a man who said he had come to return a book. 2 hours in my sitting room in which 2 quiet people began, after years, to speak. 1 marriage in April in a church in Lendwick. Fortnightly letters, every one of them longer than the last. What I cannot count: the quality of the silence through a door when 2 people stop performing, the exact moment at which careful invisibility becomes unbearable, the weight of a bag carried so long you forget it is weight, the moment you put it down. What I can count: 1 postscript, 2 sentences. The east window has the best view on the estate. I have told him so. He agrees with me. Myra would tell me I am being sentimental, and she would be right, and I would not mind. She is 27 now. She walks in the mornings. She reads what she wants to read. She catalogues the library at Caldervane Hall on no fixed schedule, because it is not her job, but she is finishing what she started, and because the east window is in that room. She has told me, in one of the letters, that he comes to the library in the late afternoon still. She did not say what they talk about. I think they talk about everything. She is, I am told by a reliable source, my own observation, the kind of person who, given the room and the time and the attention of a man who genuinely wants to know, has quite a lot to say. She always did. It only ever needed someone to ask.